Well, first of all, thank you for Creative Sheffield to invite me here to do this. And thank you all for being here. As I said, I run a kind of interdisciplinary research institute at Sheffield Hallam where we bring together everything from artists and designers to computer scientists. Then we let them do their own thing, art, design, computer science, communications, and so on. And we do try and mix them together and stir them up and try and do some interesting things. But this talk today is really about me and why I think this is a really important area for academia to engage with. That is technology, entertainment, design, and also innovation, why this should be really important. Now, there's quite a lot of people in academia who are quite happy with that. And in many respects, some of the people for this talk is kind of directed at probably aren't even in the room. And it's because they're not in the room I want to give the talk. The computer scientists, they understand the importance of innovation. The technologists understand this. The designers understand this. Some of the fine artists understand this. But when I start talking to the social scientists and the psychologists and some of the humanities people, I get told, hey, that's just technology. That's just not interesting, you know. And I still tell the story. It's only 3 or 4 years ago. I was a job interview where I was told it was really interesting that I studied the internet and people using it, but communication scholars should look at proper media like the newspapers. I tried to explain that there were more people played Xbox games than read newspapers, but I still didn't get the job. Oh, maybe that's why I didn't get the job. So I want to do a slightly more academic-y talk and explain why I think the current place we are with this interplay of technology, design, and entertainment, media, open source issues, innovation issues coming together are really important for people like me, who's technically a social scientist who's really interested in how people interact with each other. But in good, in the good old adage of communication studies that you should tell people what you're going to tell them it, and then tell them it again, here's my talk in about 30 seconds.
Our whole universe was in a hot, dense state that nearly 14 million years ago expansion started. Wait, the earth began to cool, the autotrophs began to drool, Neanderthals developed tools, we built a wall. We built the pyramids, math, science, history, unraveling the mystery that all started with a big bang.
One of the points I want to make is that where we are now as human beings is actually quite a fascinatingly strange place. It's not somewhere we've been before. And to be honest, we haven't really got our heads around that. And part of it, I think, the more time I spend working with designers, the more time I spend in the Institute, the more I become convinced that there's this interesting relationship between culture and technology, between artifacts and people, and that design especially plays an important part in it, and that human beings don't just... Design is not just something that designers do. Design is something that human beings do. We're constantly making things all the time. And many things that we do, that we've just forgotten that's what it is. And I just want to whip through some of those ideas and then reflect on what's happened over the last maybe 10 years. And think about whether or not these are in any way actually new questions. Let's think about something that is actually about design, which is writing. We even talk about communications design on the communications course. It's 6,000 years old. The first evidence of systematic writing, its cuneiform there, is 6,000 years old. So that's 6,000 years from the first clay tablets about yay size, you hold in your hand with a little stick and you fill it in, to Word on my iPhone. That's a long process of change and design and innovation from one to the other. And though there is this superficial similarity between the clay and the thing, which has about affordances and hands or something, you know, there's the history of the pen. It's quite a huge history of technological innovation, but over a very long period of time. I mean, that was my attempt in a video to do 6,000 years worth of communications history. But let's go something more closer to home, the TV. These are the inventors of the TV. People always in Britain think it's John Logie Baird, but it wasn't. These were the previous inventors of TV, and the ones we actually use is from an American guy who died in poverty. But it's essentially only 120 years from the first kind of design through to your 50-inch flat screen TV connected to your PlayStation 3, your Blu-ray DVD, your surround sound, and your full-blown multimedia interface. And in fact, I walked through St Pancras, and they were advertising 3D tellies. a big stand with people looking at 3D tellies. And I had to kind of not stop myself standing there for ages, being a complete geek and asking loads of questions. But that's only 150 years of history. If we go 30 years, Pong, for those of us who remember going around to our friend's house in the kind of late 70s and be utterly amazed by a little dot going backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, to, I don't know what, Gears of War, you know, and almost fully immersive, really quite photorealistic and rather, you know, engaging for those of us who sadly like those kind of games, game. Or something like Little Big Planet, which is about design. Build your own game. You know, the game is no longer the game. The game is to build the game, to use the resources, to be creative, to innovate. Think about the web. It's only 15 years-ish, you know, since the web really took off. I mean, I still remember having to boot Unix on the PC to be able to get the web browser up, to be able to look at the web, which was just text, in 1994. Now we have people creating content, and we also have the Internet of Things, the previous talk, you know, that is going up there, being used by millions of people. And to those people who were interviewing me about how important newspapers were, we know, you know, a T-Mobile viral ad can have 1.2 million viewers in 24 hours, or some of the things on YouTube have unbelievable audiences, of the size of that Beatles audience, yeah, over a very short period of time, whereas Coronation Street has, on average, 10 million viewers. It's a different world from just 15 years ago. But the thing I want to quickly focus on is the good old mobile phone, because it's great for many of these points. If you think about the history of the mobile phone, it goes back to about the 1950s. The first real mobile phones in cars come from the 1950s. But for those with a kind of design background, it's had, until the last year or so, last 2-3 years, the same type form. It has looked like early electronic phones with the buttons and the little space for the screen. And you know, this was a set of images I put together about 4 years ago, you know, with the kind of BlackBerry on the end. And then that really is since 2000. Since 2000, you know, the mobile phone has come of age. And it has a very short history. Radio phones, 1950s, stayed pretty much like that right through until the 80s. This is a picture from the first BBC TV news report about these new handheld phone you can walk around with. I love the face. What is this button I'm pressing? So, I mean, that is a 20 years, writing 6,000 years of history. We are, at the moment, developing, innovating new ways of interacting with other human beings at an unprecedented rate. And then now, it's a ubiquitous. There's so many of them out there. Multimodal communications device. And if we kind of sit down and try and write down all the different ways you, as one human being, could talk to another human being, and all the innovations there's been in how to communicate with another human being, just in the last 5 or 10 years, you end up with a list of 20-odd things, and every time you do it, you start saying, well, actually, what is the difference between text and Twitter? What's the difference between... And you find all these little subtle differences, and they're all little tiny variations on different ways of me talking to you, or me talking to a crowd, or a crowd talking to me, and so on, that have not existed ever before in the history of human beings. And I don't think we as academics, that designers, that technologists and others have really actually got their head around what this is doing to human beings. There's a couple of sociologists I like. Steve Woolgar is one, Harvey Mollock is another, who talk about effectively the way in which things come into being, where stuff comes from. And one of the interesting things is the more they talk about how things come into being, products, technologies, they end up basically saying, well, actually what comes into being is not a technology, it's a relationship between a technology and people. That when you configure a system, when you design a device, when someone produces something with the Arduino or whatever, they're not just producing a thing on its own. They're producing a relationship. And in fact, they're configuring the user, as Steve Woolgar puts it. It's a two-way street. So all of this change is not changing. It's not just new toys out there. It's actually new people out there. Somewhere in the audience is Ellie, who was my PhD student, but she just passed last week, and is a research assistant with us. And she's just done her thesis on, the way in which the public and private has changed with the rise of the mobile phone. And, starting 5 years ago with the research to now, things are different now than when she started 5 years ago. And we're going through this constant at the moment, kind of revolution. And it's changing how we talk. Daily Mail, the Daily Express gets really upset about text speak. It turns out that something like 80% of text content is completely correctly spelt because of predictive texting, and the other stuff that shortens is exactly incorrectly used grammatically. There isn't actually that much that's wrong in text, but anyway. But it's changed. It's changed what we think communication is. And lastly, for some parts of the world, I saw some wonderful, well-done graphics on how this is not the case, say, in sub-Saharan Africa. It's become something we all carry around. In fact, I've just taken it off because I've got this other thing on here. But, we just carry it with us all the time. I mean, who in this room does not currently have a mobile phone on them? Wow, that's the first time I've had no hands, all right? But I started lecturing on this stuff years ago, and I used to ask each year who's got a mobile phone, who's got access to what, and slowly but surely the number of students putting a hand up would rise. And it is only since 2001 odd when it's been most of the students. But we have it with us all the time. Who could live without it? Who could go for a month without their mobile phone? Right, really? Try it. Okay, I was in Brussels, and we couldn't find the damn hotel. Out comes the iPhone, got the map out, great, found the hotel, and then it ran out of juice halfway to the hotel. Now, fortunately, I'm quite good with maps, so I'd kind of got it in my head, but I thought, you could easily now be stranded, middle of nowhere. All that reliance on that little device. And unfortunately, there's the other, just to kind of add a negative note at the end, it's not just the fun stuff. We were talking about the fun of playing with an Arduino, etc. But one of the uses that's been put to, the mobile phone is put to, is, terrorists use it for managing themselves. They use it for managing their activities. They use it for blowing up bombs. I mean, these technologies are really becoming parts of every aspect of our lives. And for me, therefore, people like social scientists should be spending a lot of time understanding the process of how they come into being, how they get used, how they get designed, how they configure people, and how they change the world around us. And it's a kind of little, propaganda or whatever, or message from me that the more of us that do, the more we'll get a better understanding of it, which we can feed back to the designers, which the designers can feed to us, the technologists can look at. So we come to understand better, not just the technology, but what we are now as people. So events like this, where you bring all of that kind of community together, to me are the important thing that we should do. And I finish with just a reminder that we've gone 6,000 years from poking bits of clay to poking bits of plastic. Thank you.